In 1985, Apple's board of directors voted to fire the man who founded the company, not a failed CEO brought in from outside, not an executive who had overstayed his welcome, the actual founder, the man whose name was on the door, the man who had built Apple from nothing in a garage in Los Altos, California. Steve Jobs was 30 years old, and the company he created had just shown him the exit. But here's what most people get wrong about this story. The official version, that Jobs was fired for being difficult, for clashing with CEO John Sculley, for being too much of a visionary, that's only half the story. The full story is about a power struggle, a betrayal, a board that didn't understand what it had, and one of the greatest miscalculations in business history. This is the Founder Files. To truly grasp why Steve Jobs was forced out of the company he co-founded, we have to rewind the clock to 1984. On the surface, Apple wasn't just a company, it was a cultural revolution in the making, and Jobs was its charismatic leader. The Macintosh had just launched, unveiled to the world, with the now legendary 1984 Super Bowl ad. Directed by Ridley Scott, it didn't even show the product. It sold an idea, a rebellion. The ad, and Jobs' masterful stage presentation, cemented Apple as the hottest company in Silicon Valley. Jobs himself was on the cover of every magazine, hailed as a visionary, a prophet for the digital age. But behind the scenes, the reality was far from the public perception. Apple was in serious trouble. The Macintosh, despite its revolutionary design, was failing in the marketplace. Jobs had confidently forecast sales of 70,000 units per month. The actual number was a fraction of that, closer to 20,000. The machine was beautiful but flawed. With just 128 kilobytes of RAM, it was severely underpowered. It was also expensive, and crucially, had almost no software. A computer without software is just a box, and developers were slow to support the new platform. Meanwhile, the Apple II, the older, simpler machine that Jobs openly disdained, was the company's workhorse. It was the boring product that was quietly generating almost all of Apple's revenue. The division running it, filled with people Jobs considered corporate drones, was outselling his elite Mac team by a massive margin, creating deep resentment and setting the stage for a corporate civil war. Jobs had a serious problem, and his response to that problem is what ultimately got him fired. Instead of acknowledging the Mac's struggles and working with the broader Apple team to fix them, Jobs doubled down. He became increasingly controlling, increasingly erratic, and increasingly difficult to work with. He would show up to meetings and declare colleagues' work they had spent months on, as total shuck. He would change his mind completely from one day to the next. He created a culture of fear around the Mac team while simultaneously dismissing everyone outside it. Apple's board decided they needed professional management. They needed someone who could run a real company, not just inspire one. In 1983, they recruited John Sculley, the president of PepsiCo, with one of the most famous recruiting pitches in business history. Jobs looked at Sculley and said, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley chose to change the world. Within 2 years, he and Jobs were at war. The conflict between Jobs and Sculley started professionally and became personal very quickly. Jobs wanted the Mac to be Apple's entire future. Sculley wanted to protect the profitable Apple II business. Jobs wanted to slash the Mac's price to drive adoption. Sculley wanted to protect margins. Jobs wanted absolute control. Sculley had the board's confidence. In early 1985, Jobs made a fatal miscalculation. He tried to stage a coup. He went to Apple's board and told them that Sculley was the wrong person to lead the company, that he, Jobs, should be CEO. He had been secretly meeting with board members, trying to build support for Sculley's removal, but Jobs had misjudged the room. The board didn't agree with him. Worse, one of the board members he had confided in went straight to Sculley and told him everything. Sculley confronted Jobs directly, and then he went to the board himself. The vote was swift and decisive. The board sided with Sculley. Jobs was stripped of all operational responsibilities. His entire division was taken away. He was given a title, chairman, that meant absolutely nothing. Steve Jobs had tried to remove John Sculley, and John Sculley had removed him instead. What happened next is where the story gets complicated and the legend of Steve Jobs truly begins to form. For several agonizing months, he remained a ghost at his own company. He still had an office, a title, and a salary, but he was stripped of all responsibilities. He would wander the halls of Apple, a specter of the past, a stranger in the very house he had built. It was a period of profound isolation, a public exile designed to sideline him completely. By September 1985, the charade was over. He made his decision. He resigned from Apple's board entirely, a move that sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley. In a final defiant act, he sold almost all of his Apple shares, keeping just one, a symbolic reminder of what he had lost, and perhaps what he intended to reclaim. And then, he walked out the door, seemingly for good. But Jobs didn't disappear into obscurity. He started a new company almost immediately. Next. It was a bold venture, building powerful, elegant workstation computers for universities and researchers. More importantly, he was building the operating system of the future. Next step. It was revolutionary, and its object-oriented foundation was so advanced, it would one day become the very core of Apple's own Mac OS X. During this time, he also made a small, almost casual investment in a struggling graphics hardware division that a friend recommended. That company was called Pixar. Over the next decade, while Apple struggled without him, making confusing products, burning through CEOs and drifting towards bankruptcy, Jobs was quietly building his future. In his wilderness years, he wasn't just waiting, he was learning, evolving, and assembling the pieces for the most stunning comeback in business history. Next produced an operating system that would eventually become the foundation of Mac OS X. Pixar produced Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film, and became worth billions. And in 1996, Apple, desperate, directionless, and weeks away from bankruptcy, came back to Jobs. They didn't just rehire him, they acquired Next for $429 million specifically to get him back. The operating system Apple needed was sitting inside Next. The CEO Apple needed was sitting inside Jobs. So what was the real reason Steve Jobs was fired? So why was Steve Jobs really fired from the company he co-founded? The comfortable answer, the one that fits neatly into the myth of the tortured genius, is that he was simply too difficult, too demanding, too visionary for the corporate world to contain. And in many ways, that's true. His relentless pursuit of perfection and his infamous reality distortion field were legendary, pushing teams to achieve the impossible, but also creating immense friction. But the deeper, more complex truth is that Jobs was fired because he tried to seize control of something that was never entirely his to begin with. Apple wasn't a solo act, it was a symphony, conducted by Jobs, yes, but played by Steve Wozniak, Mike Markkula, and the hundreds of brilliant engineers and designers who poured their lives into building it. When Jobs began to see the company as his personal kingdom rather than a shared creation, the very people who helped build it felt compelled to push back. The final confrontation wasn't about product vision, it was a power struggle. After attempting to orchestrate a boardroom coup to oust CEO John Sculley, Jobs found the tables turned on him. The board, faced with a choice between a disruptive founder and a stable executive structure, made a painful decision. They didn't fire a genius. They sidelined a leader who had stopped listening to his own team. And the painful, beautiful irony is that this public failure was the crucible that forged his return. Everything Jobs did after being fired, the profound humility he developed at Next, the patience he learned watching Pixar grow from a hardware company into a storytelling giant, the hard-won wisdom that only comes from failing on a global stage, all of it transformed him. It shaped him into the collaborative, focused, and mature leader that Apple desperately needed when he finally came back home. He needed to be fired to become the person who could save the company. Sometimes the most important thing that can happen to a founder is losing the thing they built. Not because failure is good, but because what you learn on the way back up is worth more than anything you learned on the way up. Steve Jobs came back to Apple in 1997. Within 3 years he had launched the iMac, the iPod, and iTunes. Within a decade he had launched the iPhone. The rest, as they say, is history. That's the Founder Files for this week. If this story changed how you think about failure and leadership, subscribe and join us every Saturday for more incredible stories from the founders who shaped our world. Hit the bell and drop a comment below. Do you think Apple made the right decision firing Jobs, or was it the biggest mistake in Silicon Valley history? We'll see you next Saturday.